We find ourselves standing at a pivotal juncture in this investigation where public image clashed intensely with the quiet reality recorded in police reports and private testimony. As a guide through this narrative, I believe it is crucial to analyze how the televised story, often driven by intense public curiosity and media monetization, deviated sharply from the detailed, frustrating facts gathered by investigators. We seek not to judge, but to understand the mechanics of the distortion, how the pursuit of truth became complicated by the spectacle of accusation. 1. The dynamic of dialogue, negotiating cooperation and control. The earliest records reveal a profound struggle between the needs of the investigation and the defense strategies employed by the family, often framed publicly as a refusal to cooperate. In the 1997 April interview with Boulder Police Department, Detective Thomas notes the further purpose of the interview on Wednesday, April 30th, 1997, highlighting the continuation of the investigative process. Yet, in the 1998 June interview, John Ramsey explains that, from their perspective, the Boulder police were out to lynch us from the start, preventing the establishment of genuine dialogue. This foundational belief system meant the Ramseys required specific assurances, leading to conditions for their subsequent interviews. From a psychological perspective, this defensive posture represents a classic manifestation of threat perception. When individuals believe they are facing an existential threat to their freedom, reputation, or family unit, the human brain enters a heightened state of vigilance. The amygdala, our threat detection center, becomes hyperactive, while the prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational decision-making, becomes compromised. This neurological reality means that cooperation becomes nearly impossible when trust has eroded. The Ramseys were operating from a position of perceived psychological siege, where every interaction was filtered through the lens of self-preservation rather than collaborative truth-seeking. In The Death of Innocence, John Ramsey recounts an incident where their attorney told them the police had refused to release JonBenet's body for burial until they submitted to an interrogation, an action which severely damaged their trust and forced them to reset their perception of law enforcement's intentions. This context transformed every subsequent interaction from a straightforward search for facts into a high-stakes negotiation for control over the narrative. Anthropologically speaking, this represents a fundamental breakdown in the social contract between citizens and law enforcement. In most cultures, police serve as protectors and mediators of justice, but when that trust dissolves, the entire investigative structure becomes adversarial rather than collaborative. The introduction of counsel further complicated the investigator's ability to gather timely information. In the 1998 June interview, Lou Smith laments the difficulty of communication, noting that requests filtered through multiple attorneys resulted in a great deal of time is expended. John Ramsey expresses his personal frustration with this process in the same document, asserting that he would love not to have attorneys involved, to simply get on with this and figure out who did this. This need for legal mediation, however, was born from a perception of deliberate malice. In the 2000 August interview in Atlanta, Patsy's attorney, Patrick Burke, emphatically states that he resents the word that she failed to cooperate. In The Death of Innocence, Patsy is quoted discussing the CNN interview, where the couple hoped their comments would refute false information leaked by police suggesting they were not cooperating. The tension between investigators seeking unfiltered answers and the parents feeling besieged led to deliberate strategies on both sides. In The Death of Innocence, John Ramsey details that when they were finally prepared to return to Boulder, their attorney advised them that the condition for interrogations was that a representative of the district attorney's office must be present to observe them, to ensure an independent observer heard their accounts, reflecting a deep distrust of the police motives. Furthermore, Patsy notes that police were allegedly contacting friends and asking questions intended to bias the witnesses against the suspect and let them spill their guts out, furthering the family's conviction that the police investigation was targeted rather than objective. This environment meant that cooperation was constantly offered, but strictly on terms designed to safeguard against the perceived threat John Ramsey articulated. From a forensic criminology standpoint, this dynamic creates significant challenges. Investigators work within narrow windows of opportunity, memories fade, physical evidence degrades, and witnesses scatter. When cooperation is delayed or conditional, the investigative timeline extends exponentially, creating opportunities for contamination, both of evidence and of witness testimony. Yet the police must balance this urgency against the constitutional rights of individuals to legal representation and protection from self-incrimination. When cooperation becomes conditional, the investigator must peel back the layers of fear and self-preservation to find the raw truth underneath. The public sees only the delay. The records show the strategy behind it. From everything available in the case files, one observes that investigators were following established protocols. They were applying logical sequences, conducting interviews systematically, and pursuing leads according to standard investigative procedure. The cognitive processes involved in such an investigation require methodical attention to detail, prioritization of evidence, and hypothesis testing, all of which take considerable time. The question arises, why haven't the most modern DNA technologies been applied more aggressively in recent years? The reality may be economic and bureaucratic rather than investigative. At the height of the investigation in 1997 and 1998, the Boulder Police Department reportedly spent approximately $1.6 million on this case, including overtime, DNA analysis, travel to interview suspects across state lines and internationally, and extensive forensic work. When a case transitions into cold case status, budget allocations shift toward more recent investigations, and the resources dedicated to older cases diminish significantly. Additionally, from a practical forensic standpoint, DNA evidence is finite. Each test consumes a portion of the sample, and with older collection methods, the available biological material may be limited. Investigators must weigh the potential value of new testing technologies against the risk of exhausting the evidence entirely. This represents a philosophical dilemma. Is it better to wait for definitively superior technology or to test now with currently available methods? Each choice carries profound implications for the case's eventual resolution. 2. The battle for narrative primacy, evidence under the microscope. When the facts eventually emerged through interviews and depositions, they were placed under intense scrutiny, frequently revealing discrepancies or unusual circumstances that fueled the media's original suspicions, reinforcing the cycle of public accusation. The case of the undigested pineapple remains one of the most compelling examples where forensic fact challenged the established timeline. In the 2000 August interview, prosecutor Mike Cain insists to Patsy Ramsey's attorney that the presence of pineapple in JonBenet's digestive tract is a fact and asks Patsy if she had talked to anybody about the finding. In the 1998 June interview, Lou Smith stresses to John Ramsey that the pineapple being found is a fact that it's in there and asks if it was possible someone could have gotten JonBenet up and fed her. John Ramsey is adamant, repeatedly asserting, "I will guarantee you it was not after she came home because she was sound asleep." This small piece of physical evidence directly contradicted the parents' account of JonBenet remaining asleep after they returned, opening a major crack in the timeline that the media quickly exploited as evidence of a cover-up. From a physiological perspective, the presence of undigested pineapple is extraordinarily revealing. The human digestive system processes food at relatively predictable rates, though individual variation exists. Fresh pineapple typically remains in the stomach for approximately 1 to 2 hours before moving into the small intestine. The fact that recognizable pineapple pieces were found suggests consumption occurred within this window before the tragic events unfolded. This creates a temporal anchor point that either confirms or contradicts witness statements. The philosophical question becomes, does a single contradiction necessarily indicate deception? Or might it represent the fallibility of human memory under extreme stress? Memory is not a recording device, but a reconstructive process influenced by emotion, stress, fatigue, and the passage of time. Parents who carried their sleeping child into the house late at night might genuinely not remember whether the child awoke briefly, or they might have been unaware if someone else in the household interacted with the child. The scrutiny applied during private interviews often focused on these perceived inconsistencies, serving to prepare the prosecution against future defense strategies. In the 1998 June interview, Mike Cain adopts a direct, challenging approach, telling John Ramsey he must play the role that a defense attorney is going to play and ask tough questions because the defense would inevitably try to pin responsibility on the family if an intruder were charged. John Ramsey acknowledges this interesting perspective, accepting that he would be placed under more scrutiny now. This intense psychological pressure, documented within the 2000 August interview, involved investigators like Tom Haney utilizing information such as the claim of prior signs of concern to shock and observe Patsy Ramsey's reaction, which she described as being very distressed and shocked. This technique, while ethically contentious, represents standard interrogation methodology designed to elicit genuine emotional responses that might reveal deception or, conversely, confirm authenticity. From the perspective of getting inside the mind of someone responsible for such acts, we must consider what psychological profiles suggest. Individuals who commit such acts against children often fall into several categories: family members under extreme stress, who lose control in a moment of rage, individuals with paraphilias who have planned their actions, or opportunistic perpetrators who take advantage of access and vulnerability. Each type leaves distinct behavioral signatures. A family member acting in a moment of lost control would likely show signs of immediate remorse, panic, and disorganized thinking. The crime scene might reflect staging attempts to redirect suspicion or create an alternative narrative. However, such staging is typically transparent to experienced investigators because it reflects the perpetrator's assumptions about what evidence should look like rather than how actual events unfold organically. An individual with darker compulsions who planned the act would likely demonstrate more organization, potentially bringing tools or restraints, and might take souvenirs or leave behind signatures related to their psychological needs. The extensive ransom note in this case defies typical patterns, as ransom notes in genuine situations are usually brief and functional. A lengthy note suggests either genuine psychological disturbance or deliberate misdirection. An opportunistic perpetrator might be someone with access to the home who saw an unexpected chance and acted impulsively. Such individuals often make mistakes, leaving DNA, fingerprints, or other trace evidence because they hadn't planned their actions carefully. They might also flee quickly once the act was complete, leaving behind a chaotic scene. Even the handwriting analysis of the extensive ransom note became a contested issue in the public domain. In the 1998 June interview, John Ramsey states that their experts rated Patsy as 4.5 on a scale of 5 inches for not having written it. However, in a later discussion, former Boulder Police Chief Mark Beckner notes that a hired linguistic analyst, Donald Foster, concluded that Patsy wrote the note based on linguistic similarities, even though Foster later damaged his own credibility by publicly contradicting his finding after consulting with the Ramseys. The length of the note itself defied known conventions, as Chief Beckner reports. The FBI told them they had never seen a 2.5-page ransom note before. John Ramsey observed that Patsy felt relieved a note was left, believing it provided evidence the perpetrator would have to follow up on, showing a focus on the note as a foreign element rather than an attempt at misdirection. Linguistically, the ransom note presents fascinating contradictions. It contains specific references to John Ramsey's bonus amount, suggests familiarity with the family's circumstances, and includes phrases from popular films. The handwriting analysis remains inconclusive because handwriting can be deliberately altered and no exemplar perfectly matched. From a forensic document examination standpoint, proving authorship requires not just similarities but also the absence of significant dissimilarities, a standard difficult to meet when someone might be deliberately disguising their natural hand. The truth of any tragedy is fractured, comprised of partial facts and human memory. When investigators sift through the evidence, they look for clarity. The public, however, tends to seize upon the shards that confirm a preconceived narrative, whether that story is based on the pineapple or the emotional cues of the accused. One recurring theme throughout the case records involves John Ramsey's expressed frustration with law enforcement's approach and his hope that investigators would pursue what he considers the correct direction. Yet, when pressed for specifics about what exactly is preventing progress, the statements remain somewhat vague. Both John and Patsy, along with Burke and John Andrew, express wishes that police would find the person responsible, but without detailing what specific investigative actions they believe are being neglected. The Ramseys hired their own investigative teams, yet these private investigators, by all available accounts, did not produce breakthrough evidence that significantly advanced the investigation. They provided tips and potential suspects to police, who then investigated these leads using the same methodological rigor applied to all other aspects of the case. This suggests that the Boulder Police Department was not dismissing externally generated leads, but rather subjecting them to the same evidential standards as internally developed theories. John Ramsey continues to express hope that newer police leadership will take a fresh approach, specifically one that looks beyond the family to external perpetrators. However, he does not share publicly what responses he receives from law enforcement when he advocates for this direction. This silence raises questions. Are investigators telling him they lack sufficient evidence to pursue external theories? Are there fundamental disagreements about the interpretation of existing evidence? The fact that multiple police administrations over decades have maintained similar investigative postures suggests either institutional inertia or, alternatively, that the evidence continues to point in directions that do not align with the family's preferred narrative. 3. The shadow of external narratives, image management, and insulated reality. The media did not just report the facts. In many instances, they actively shaped the case, forcing the family and investigators alike to engage in ongoing image management and self-defense, a cycle John Ramsey repeatedly condemned. In the 1998 June interview, John Ramsey describes the media ecosystem as a horrible cancer and an entertainment industry that has caused a rush to judgment. This profound mistrust dictated their actions, including the hiring of media consultants, which John Ramsey quickly called the biggest mistake he ever made, explaining that consultants were meant to isolate them from the piranhas and respond with accurate information. From an anthropological perspective, the media's role in shaping cultural narratives about crime represents a modern form of collective myth-making. Throughout human history, societies have created stories to explain tragedy and assign meaning to chaos. In the era of mass media, these stories are constructed and disseminated with unprecedented speed and reach. The JonBenet case became not just a crime, but a cultural touchstone, a story through which audiences process their own fears about childhood vulnerability, parental responsibility, and the dark potential hidden within seemingly perfect families. The psychological impact of this media saturation cannot be overstated. The Ramsey family became symbols rather than people, their every gesture analyzed and interpreted through the lens of presumed guilt. This represents a phenomenon social psychologists call confirmation bias. Once an initial narrative is established, people unconsciously seek information that confirms their existing beliefs while dismissing contradictory evidence. In The Death of Innocence, John further elaborates that they chose to participate in a BBC documentary to use their story as a real-life example of what was so tragically wrong with the media in the United States, hoping to make something substantially good come out of their immense loss. This attempt to reclaim their narrative represents a deeply human need for agency in the face of overwhelming powerlessness. The public focus on the parents meant that evidence supporting the intruder theory was often dismissed or overshadowed, requiring John Ramsey and Lou Smith to actively promote alternative theories. In the 1998 June interview, John Ramsey details following up on leads, including various possibilities, stating that he tried to generate leads himself because he felt investigators were overlooking alternatives. The same document details John Ramsey's hypothesis about potential suspects, including the former Santa Claus, Bill McReynolds, mentioning a friend's observation about McReynolds' behavior at the memorial and noting that McReynolds fits the box that John Douglas drew for it, linking potential suspects to familiarity with the family and the house. Lou Smith's efforts to focus on the intruder theory contrasted sharply with the internal suspicions of the Boulder police, as Lou Smith himself notes in The Death of Innocence that certain investigators elected to follow a theory and let their theory direct them rather than allowing the evidence to direct them. This methodological debate strikes at the heart of investigative philosophy. Should investigators follow the evidence wherever it leads, maintaining openness to all possibilities? Or should they develop working theories based on statistical probabilities and then test those theories systematically? The latter approach risks confirmation bias, but the former can lead to scattered, inefficient investigation. The ideal methodology involves iterative hypothesis testing, developing theories based on evidence, testing those theories rigorously, and remaining willing to abandon theories when evidence contradicts them. From a forensic criminology perspective, the intruder theory faces several evidential challenges that investigators must reconcile. There were no signs of forced entry that could be definitively attributed to an intruder on that specific night. The perpetrator would have needed intimate knowledge of the home's layout, the family schedule, and John Ramsey's financial details. The lengthy ransom note written inside the home suggests the perpetrator spent considerable time there, increasing risk of detection. These factors don't make an intruder theory impossible, but they do require explanation. Conversely, those who theorize family involvement must explain how parents with no prior history of such actions could commit such acts against their child and then maintain consistent denial for decades. They must account for why Burke, who was only 9 years old at the time, has never wavered in his account despite years of psychological pressure and media scrutiny. They must explain the unknown DNA found on the child's clothing and body. The private psychological toll of this public spectacle is evident in the records detailing Burke Ramsey's experience. In his appearance discussing the case years later, Burke describes seeing his picture plastered on supermarket tabloids, calling the media presence a chaotic nightmare that made him a very private person. The developmental psychology of a child thrust into such circumstances is profoundly concerning. Burke was at a critical age for identity formation, and instead of normal childhood experiences, he faced global scrutiny and suspicion. Patsy Ramsey addresses this in her 1998 June interview, stating that she had removed their television and stopped reading newspapers to avoid the pain, recalling seeing commentators on TV inciting audiences to crucify them. This language is particularly revealing. It invokes not just punishment, but public spectacle, the ancient practice of making examples of the accused to satisfy collective bloodlust. John Ramsey echoes this, stating in the 1998 June interview that the treatment imposed by the investigation was only exceeded by what happened to them, framing the investigation itself as a secondary source of deep pain. This statement, while undoubtedly reflecting genuine anguish, also complicates the investigative picture. From the investigators' perspective, they were pursuing their professional duty to find justice. From the family's perspective, they were victims being re-victimized by those who should have been helping them. We must recognize that the psychological battlefield on which the family fought their isolation often blurred the lines between defending their innocence and managing their image. For the family, survival meant insulating themselves from the world that accused them. For the investigator, survival meant navigating a world polluted by those very accusations. One critical issue that emerged involves the grand jury proceedings. Grand jury members reportedly expressed frustration that information widely circulated in public discourse was not being presented in their official proceedings. This concerned then District Attorney Alex Hunter, who faced the difficult task of managing the boundary between admissible evidence and public speculation. From an investigator's perspective, maintaining focus on legally admissible, verifiable evidence is paramount. Grand juries must base their decisions on facts that can be proven in court, not on media reports or speculation. However, when grand jurors are also members of the public, exposed to the same media saturation as everyone else, maintaining this boundary becomes psychologically challenging. They may feel that the prosecution is being selective or disingenuous by not addressing theories they've heard elsewhere. This creates a philosophical tension. Is justice better served by a narrow focus on provable facts or by a broader consideration of context and circumstantial patterns? The legal system errs toward the former, requiring proof beyond reasonable doubt. Yet, this standard can sometimes mean that cases with strong circumstantial evidence but no definitive proof cannot move forward, leaving families and communities without closure. The forensic criminology angle requires us to consider what physical evidence actually exists and what it tells us. DNA evidence was found that did not match family members, though the significance and source of this DNA remain debated. Some experts suggest it could be touch DNA from manufacturing or innocent contact before the clothing was worn. Others maintain it represents evidence of an unknown perpetrator. Fiber evidence, hair samples, and other trace materials were collected and analyzed, but none provided definitive answers. The crime scene itself presents puzzles. If staging occurred, was it sophisticated or amateurish? Were items moved to create a false narrative, or did events unfold as they appeared? The ransom note remains perhaps the most analyzed piece of evidence. Its length, its content, its linguistic patterns, all subjected to intense scrutiny by multiple experts who reach contradictory conclusions. Getting inside the mind of whoever was responsible requires considering psychological motivation. If this was an act by someone within the family, what would drive such a momentary loss of control that it escalated to the ultimate consequence? Family annihilators and those who cause serious harm to children in domestic settings often share certain characteristics: extreme stress, feelings of inadequacy or failure, substance abuse issues, or mental health crises. Yet those who knew the Ramseys saw no obvious signs of such a crisis, though private family dynamics often remain hidden from outsiders. If this was an external perpetrator, what was their motivation? Was it about the child specifically, about revenge against the family, about some dark psychological need, or about financial gain that went catastrophically wrong? Each motivation would leave different signatures in how the events unfolded and what evidence was left behind. The philosophical angle asks us to consider larger questions about justice, truth, and certainty. Can we ever truly know what happened in the absence of confession or definitive evidence? Does the accused's right to presumption of innocence outweigh the public's need for answers? At what point does an investigation transition from pursuing justice to perpetuating trauma? The JonBenet Ramsey case still embodies the struggle between truth and perception. It reflects the clash between public curiosity and private grief, law enforcement duty and family rights, and the yearning for closure against the reality of incomplete evidence. A young child was killed under circumstances never fully explained, and her family has lived under suspicion ever since. Investigators have pursued answers within legal limits, while the media's shifting narratives have distorted understanding. The tragedy now extends beyond the crime itself, to the years of pain, distrust, and cultural obsession that followed. Ultimately, the case teaches humility: to accept uncertainty, recognize bias, and continue seeking truth without assuming it will yield simple answers. The mechanics of distortion we've explored, the negotiation between cooperation and control, the battle over narrative primacy, and the shadow cast by external narratives all reveal how easily the search for truth can be compromised by human psychology, institutional limitations, or media influence. Understanding these mechanics doesn't give us the answer we seek, but it does help us see more clearly how the question itself became so distorted. That's it for this episode. I want you to take care of yourself, be kind to one another, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and until the next time, take it easy.